talking about the Iran protests and not just the overall story of what started it, which has been just a lot of economic strife that's been facing the people over time. But we want to specifically look at how social media is really adding fuel to the flames. So, we've seen this type of social media, not really, I mean, some of it's propaganda, but some of it is just, again, more outsourcing of information to keep people better informed of what's happening, right? So, what we're looking at is how is social media ramping up the Iran protests? Because we've seen it in the US for the past election, and many other countries have seen it for their elections as well. And so for this, what we're seeing is that politicians and activists both are utilizing social media to help spread their specific messaging. And there is a great article right now by the BBC that elaborates even more on this situation. But to kind of summarize, what they pointed out was that protesters want to show demonstrations, right? They want to show that they're taking action and the reasons for why they are taking action. So they have been spreading out videos and photos in order to raise awareness as well as for getting involvement, getting more people into the streets. And thus far, there have already been over 40,000 people that have come out to these different protests to protest the current Iranian Republic that's currently established. And basically, they've been using social media such as Telegram and Instagram to share out these messages. But the interesting fact is that the Republic that's currently in power has also been utilizing it to generate discouraging messages against the protesters, against the news going out there. They actually had people review and study thousands upon thousands of social robots who are actually going out and auto-generating content against the protesters, as well as specific messaging to the protesters who are posting said videos and photos saying, oh, this is fake. No one is out here. Don't follow this. Like, oh, this is ridiculous. I was there yesterday and there's nothing going on. This is all propaganda. And people looked into it and found out most of these are social robots that are sending out the same message to all sorts of content. They have very little subscribers. The accounts were recently created. They don't have any actual pictures that they use. It's all like either a little cartoon animation or no picture at all. But it's been very interesting to see, in many respects, the marketing tactics being used by both sides and how they're trying to push one side over the other. Just recently, actually, someone noticed that the protesters have been using hashtag nationwide underscore protests. So what did the Republic decide to do? Well, they decided to put out their own hashtag that was hashtag nationwide underscore riots. So as you can see already, there's already spin being put on to the messaging being shared out on social media. You have one group saying, well, these are protests, which is a strong word for standing up against something that's wrong, right? And then you have, from the other side, riots. So now all of a sudden, oh, well, these are riots, it's anarchy, it's out of control, which usually leads to like what? Thoughts of violence, fires, people flipping cars, basically what people do all the time in the US when it comes to college football games. So, with that, what are some of your thoughts based off hearing this, that, you have two sides in this battle over how this country should be led, and so much of it is being dictated based off the information being shared on social media?
It's interesting because, ironically, maybe, they also then temporarily blocked Telegram and Instagram. The officials did.
Oh, yeah.
So, first they were, uh, you know, battling it out on social media, and then they were like, actually, we're just gonna take social media out of the picture. Like, okay. That's thanks for doing that. Like, first they were gonna join in and like try to fight them on their own turf, as it were. But then they were like, oh, never mind, actually, we're just gonna shut you all down. And the other platforms as well, the other social media platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, have actually been banned in Iran since 2009.
Oh, yeah. And the reason for that was because in 2009, there were other protests going on where protesters, activists were utilizing those social media platforms then too to get their point across and to try to get more support, as well as to share their story to a larger audience, being the international audience, to see if they can get assistance outside of their own country.
But in terms of the government, the officials in power, going to social media to really have a baby rage on social media, because that's where the people are having the revolution out in front of everybody. And plus, social media is seen worldwide, so it's not like, oh, only people in Iran could see it. Right. I feel like the government sort of had to do something on social media because they couldn't look bad, as it were, right? Like, oh, well, we have to defend ourselves, but then still resorted to, well, actually, we're just going to take this all offline, like, F you guys, right? It's always been, I think, especially in Twitter's case, which of course wasn't part of this particular protest because it was already banned, but these social media platforms that are kind of real time, where news is being shared, people can actually talk to each other in real time and plan rallies and the revolution in real time, is amazing, because these businesses have offered a way for people to communicate with each other rapidly. And of course, the people in power who have traditionally kept tight tabs on what information gets released and when and everything like that, it's kind of disrupting that, right? It's disrupting the power the power structure. And I think we're seeing more and more of this, where people feel more free to voice their opinions and get things going on social media because they can find a following and they can find people, like-minded people, and they're not that the fear is any less of speaking out against the people in power, but we've witnessed in a lot of countries where people are more likely to do so on social media. And I think governments and officials now are put into an interesting predicament, because on the one hand, right, if you block those avenues of free speech, but you yourself are touting, oh yeah, no, we can free speech and we do this and we're amazing and we're great and and then these people are like, no, you're not. So if they block that information, then they have to be seen as hypocrites, right? So they look bad.
Right.
If they come out and try to reframe the conversation, trying to respin it, right? Riots versus protests, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, protest sounds peaceful and sort of like, oh, I protest this. Hey, I'm right over here. Riot means I'm like in your face saying, no, blah, right? So even just using the words that they use, it's fascinating, because they're trying to reframe the conversation, and the fact that they're creating fake bots.
Oh yeah.
And, doing all this other stuff, like, if you've got nothing to hide, right? If you're not doing anything wrong, why are you spending all this time to try to build a case for yourself on social media in sort of this very visibly, like a visible platform, and yet you're the one that sort of is reframing it and trying to be the louder person, right? Trying to, like, make more noise than the other people and say, no, I'm right. Like, you're obviously, you obviously think that you're in the wrong, because if you didn't think so, you'd be like, oh, whatever, like I got nothing to hide, this and that. So it's fascinating, because I think that these businesses, who started out as just whatever their goals were when they first started out, have turned into a real, asset for people who want to speak their mind, who want to voice their opinions, and it's kind of taken this life of its own, the social media platforms, right? And whatever which way they manifest, whether it is Instagram and it's pictures, or Twitter and 142 characters. Well, no, I guess there's more characters now, not just 140. Yeah, I don't know. It's I think it's great that the platforms are available. I think that when the powers that be then shut them down, it's one thing to create fake bots and fake accounts and do all this other stuff and try to reframe the conversation, because the people who want to get to the truth will find it, hopefully, because the other accounts are there and the other people, the other voices are there. But then when you go and you shut it down, then it's like, I don't know.
Well, and I believe it was Russia, if I remember right, that was in some hot water in the news recently, because they were actually asking Facebook to take down several posts as well as accounts that spoke negatively of the Russian government. So there are plenty of countries other than Iran who have been trying to do this and go as far as going straight to the source, going straight to the social platforms, saying, hey, you need to take these down now, or we'll just ban your platform outright, and you won't get anyone within our country using your platform. And also, Karen Soros made a great question of what type of government does Iran run? So basically what it is, it's a theocratic republic, if that makes sense to you. So with this, a lot of the supposed religion does come into play, right? So Islam. But many people would say that they don't really uphold Islam per se, and that many of these people just utilize the religion as a way to get into power. And again, that's not just Islam. There are many countries who, people will say, if it is a theocratic based system, that many of these people just utilize it in order to get power, and not really because they have that belief and want that belief to really be intrinsic within the philosophy of the people itself within that community. But yeah, that's what they are. And, with Iran too, it's interesting, and it's a really sad situation, because what's really caused all this is a lot of economic strife, as I mentioned. There were many stories about, for instance, people who were basically impoverished, and some housing was put into place, but it was very poorly done, very poorly created, and it was just it was known by the people in the area to be just really rickety and not safe. Well, Iran had an earthquake not too long ago, and those buildings were toppled, and everyone inside either barely made it out alive or died within that earthquake. And there are many other situations where stuff like this has happened, where people are saying, hey, you're not taking the money that we're paying into our system of government to invest back into us. So there are many people saying, hey, I live in unsafe conditions, or there are people saying, I work in unsafe conditions. There are many people right now who are employed who are not getting paid. And they're saying, hey, this is my job, this is how I survive, I'm not getting paid, and the government does nothing. At least that's the supposed story behind this. So people, after one thing after another, are starting to go, you know what, enough is enough. This is the breaking point. We're seeing that you don't care about us, and that we're becoming more and more impoverished while the rich become even richer. And so this has started a huge protest, well, many protests to be more specific. And like I had mentioned, over 42,000 people have been involved. 90% of them, mind you, have been under the age of 25, which is awesome to hear, because we hear excuses in the US about how, oh, the people under 25 years old, they're not really into politics. They really don't care about what happens.
Right. They're lazy and they don't know what they want, and they're just not doing much of anything.
When really, I think a lot of it is messaging. The people just aren't speaking to the younger audiences the way they should be. And, the younger individuals are not hearing what's important to them. So why go out and, for instance, vote for someone that you feel does not represent your needs, and there's no other choices out there for you? And so I think people, at least in Iran now, are having enough is enough sort of situation here, and going, well, we need to get out of this. And it's even gotten to the point where 20 people have died thus far and counting, and over 1,000 people have been jailed because of said protests.
And those numbers are also in dispute. There's some Twitter accounts reporting that over 3,000 people are jailed. The numbers just seem so, like, the discrepancies are amazing too, from what little information is now able to kind of get out of the country.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the biggest things out of this story is not just understanding better the Iran protests and how they impact just Iran itself, but also other countries, which then trickle over to us as well over here on this side of the hemisphere. And again, because we are becoming a more international economy, a more international community. And so with this, I mean, it's like the domino effect. If something small happens over in Thailand, eventually we will feel it in some form or fashion. And I think with Iran, it's going to be a good example of that, because we're going to see a lot of upheaval, a lot of situations, a lot of tensions building up in the Middle East again, even more so than it already is. And it's going to have an impact on us. So I think it's important to know this, as well as I think it's really vital to understand about looking at both sides of the story. And the reason why I mention this is because we look at stuff online and we go, you know what, it's so easy to pick one side or the other based on already kind of preconceived notions and beliefs. And, you know, with this, I really do feel like what's happening is that we don't look into both sides enough, into both sides of the story. And so we just kind of believe instantly what we're seeing online, especially if enough people are saying it loud enough, as Tatiana was saying with, you know, online people are saying, hey, look at me, I'm the louder voice, I'm the louder voice. You start believing that side. You go, well, everyone else is talking about it, saying this exact messaging, so it must be true, when that doesn't indicate that at all. You even mentioned about the numbers, for instance.
Right, and well, even saying it more, like, so often, like, that's all you ever see. You know, like maybe one protester account has 3 tweets a day, but these fake bots that the officials are putting in place have, 100 messages a day, right? You're going to see that more often. You're going to think that that's the real story. And that's how propaganda works, right? That's kind of how they used to do it, right? You just, you had control of the newspaper, so you printed out a bunch of things, or you printed out flyers and you just put them everywhere. And so people are like, well, if it's written down somewhere, it must be real, right? And that's kind of the same thing. And exactly as you mentioned, Karen Soros, it's the butterfly effect as well. A little bit earlier on when we were talking about, what you do in one part of the world that will have an impact on what's happening on the other part of the world, because we are a more global economy. And thank you also, Karen Soros, for the follow. Really appreciate that. And also thank you, Teddy, for the raid. Much appreciated. Welcome everybody into our channel. Yeah, it's really interesting also if you think about these social platforms, right? Like, they're businesses, and they're a business typically run out of one country, and maybe they have, branches in other countries, but
Right.
if the government went to one of these businesses, a government for any particular country, and said, hey, listen, we need you to get rid of these accounts, or hey, we're going to ban you from here, or hey, you can't do this, or tries to dictate how they run their business. Like, I wonder what, that's just another interesting aspect to think about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously every country's government can do whatever they want inside their country, right? But what's to stop somebody from, just because they banned these platforms in their country doesn't mean that the rest of the world isn't talking about it, or
and
that
has to follow suit with what that country wants.
Exactly. And so what I find fascinating is that some of these governments still think that, oh, just because I'm shutting down my eyes, I can't see, so no one else can, right? It's fascinating because like we mentioned, it is a global economy. Somebody could still send a text to somebody else outside of the country with the information, or how people used to get information out of countries back in the day, right? That information can still get out. And because we live in a world where if you have the ability to see what's happening outside of your own country before a ban, let's say, or something like that, you understand that you're no longer alone.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives you courage, right? That gives you the courage to go on and do more things. And so it feels like some of these people who are still in power are still kind of trying to work on the old ways of how it used to be, back when there were kings and queens and we were smashing down the peasants. And it's like, we don't live in that world anymore, or we're trying not to, at least.
Trying not to, yeah.
But I think some of these people who have been in power, certainly for a really long time, the supreme leader of Iran, and yes, that is an actual title.
That it's in his resume, folks. It's true.
Has been on.
It's official on Facebook.
Has been supreme leader since 1989, and the man is 70 years old right now. Like, he's not gonna change, how he does things, and
No.
on a whim, But it's fascinating because I feel like a lot of these governments, instead of just accepting that, hey, things are going to change. Let's change with them. Although I guess, in this case, they did try to do that, right? They went on the social platforms and they tried to fight them on their own turf, quote unquote. But it is amazing how they just keep at it. Like, they keep wanting to be, they want to hold on to something that, it worked for a long time, but we're not there anymore. I don't know.
Well, and even then, I just think the fact that they're not, what it sounds like, at least, again, from a Western perspective, which is what we always push, because we're not there, we can't speak directly for the people or the situation, but from the way it sounds, from many resources we've been looking at, is the fact that the people just aren't getting the support they need. And this seems to be a growing trend with many different countries. You can look at the US and see the same thing as well, where again, the poor are getting poorer, the richer are getting richer. Now, is there any issues with the rich people? Well, I mean, it depends, right? Depends on the person. It's all really dependent on people. But overall, the goal is to have a society where the people who are working hard, though, and are just trying to survive and put forth good into the economy, into the system of government, that they see the benefit or the fruits of their labor. And there are too many of those people who don't. And then to, I think, rise against a whole system of government is huge. So the fact that these protesters now are going out here to face this and to try to share it on social media, because now they're tying their faces to these actions. And that takes a lot of guts. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens next. And, it's interesting, too, talking about how both sides are trying to use social media now, because the security that are at these events, at these protests, trying to stop the protesters, they are actually being pointed out by the protesters.
Yes.
And so their faces, their names, their information are being shared by protesters. And you might go, well, that's highly inappropriate. Why are they doing that? Well, the reason why the protesters are doing this is because the government started this by taking images of the protesters, putting it on social media and say, hey, identify these people, give us names, give us addresses, tell us where they live and everything else. Because then that's how they would get their arrests. That's how they would find these people and stop them from further protests and from further revolutionary actions. As Karen Soros said, there's a revolution that's going to happen, the kind of a repeat of the Syrian uprising. Definitely see that. Again, there's a lot of people who are just in a really tough situation, and unfortunately things are going too slow, if at all, if moving at all into a direction that needs to happen. It needs to catch up, and it's not happening. And it's interesting. It's actually fascinating, because we see this conversation happen in so many things we talk about on this show. For instance, technology, and how, from a huge exponential growth, we're seeing huge spikes in how technology is being utilized in our everyday lives. But the problem is our judicial system can't keep up with it. We can't get checks and balances and the right security and support for that technology. And we're seeing this in how governments run, the judicial system is ran, both on a very small city level all the way up to national level. And so I really do feel like Iran won't be the only country that does this. I know we've seen actually within just the past year, protests also in China, because students wanting their education and feeling like they're being treated unfairly. Also riots, I believe if it was in Italy as well, and actually several other European countries. Spain as well. That's been huge. Also because, Barcelona is trying to break away from Spain and be basically Catalonia and be their own country. And the government there is not allowing them to. And so this is not going to be the only upheaval, folks. We're going to see a lot more. And this isn't to scare you, but to just get you to understand what's happening around you, and hopefully understand how this will impact you and the U.S. if you happen to be in the U.S. or if you're in Sweden or Norway or Germany or what have you, how this will actually impact you, because it will eventually down the line.
Right. Well, I think what it feels like is that it feels like people all over the world are waking up a little bit, right? Like, we've all been sort of complacent and not maybe sure what to do about the situations that we're in, or down this path that you're kind of like, I don't know, this is not good. And now people are just waking up and they're like, you know what? Fuck this shit. Like, I'm gonna do something about it. And look, I have a global community of people who are supporting me in this. Like, we're not the only ones. Like you're mentioning, people who are the poor people who are getting poorer and the rich that are getting richer. Like, what the fuck, right? Like why is that? Why do they think, the people in power, like, why do they think that they're going to get away with it? Because they have been getting away with it.
Exactly.
But I think now we're all sort of just waking up together, which is great, because I want to have a good future for myself. Never mind my kids, me, right? Like, we're all the center of our own universes, or should be, at least.
You got to put the mask on yourself first before you can help others.
Exactly. Right. And so much has changed in the past few years. I can't even imagine what the next 5-10 years are going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna be wild, especially because of technology, and at the rate that things are happening, and this instant communication, this instant flow of information that's available. Before, it was a little bit easier to control what was out there, but now I feel like if you want to find out the information, there is a way. It may not be easy, and it may not be cheap, but we are able to. And I certainly know there's obviously there's some countries where that's easier than others.
Right.
Which, again, part of the reason that we talk about it is we want to bring some awareness to the folks who maybe don't know what's going on in the world, don't have time, don't have the resources to look for it, but they're out there. You can make a difference, because I think we're all living in the same biosphere, biodome. Like, we're all on the same planet. Eventually, things will come to a head, especially the way things are going now.
Yeah, and we can't just say, and I think I've said this at least, if not last week, the week before, that we can't just go and put our heads in the sand and go, oh, well, it's just them over there. We're othering other people, and that's just not how it works anymore. It was a lot easier, I guess, in a way, 100 years ago, when we weren't as connected to one another, and when our economies weren't as joined at the hip as they are now because of trade agreements and what have you.
And Amazon.
And Amazon. And so, we need to make sure that we are there for human beings overall, and then we understand we are all part of the global community here, and we can't just go away, hide in our shells, and say, oh, well, that can just stay over there, because whatever that is over there will bleed over into here. And so you need to be present, cognizant of all that, because if you're frustrated with how things are going, guess what? That over there probably had an impact on that. So, and also, Karen Source again, social media and increased technology helps to inform people about what other societies look like and how they act compared to their own. And that's absolutely right for the most part, right? Like, I completely 100% agree with that. I get a lot of my news from social media, at least initially. Then I'll look into it, do the research on it, see who else is talking about it. But for the most part, yeah, social media can be great as long as, one, you don't have these bots that are controlling some of the messaging, and two, that you don't have these countries reaching out to the platforms going, hey, either don't make this trending, don't list this in your trending topics, or, shut these accounts down. As long as you don't have that. And that's the tough thing. I think social media can be a great platform, especially for getting voices heard that weren't able to be heard before, whether we like it or not. I think it's only fair. But at the same time, we have to be careful of how that message is being controlled before we see it. I think that's the biggest thing.
And in case you may be wondering, how do I spot a fake account from a real account, right? And that's a very valid question. The Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab actually put together a list of tips on how to spot bots. And some of the things that they say, for example, is frequency, right? Kind of like I was talking before, bots are prolific posters, right? They're going to post like 72 messages a day. If you see 144 from somebody, just think about how crazy that is for an actual person to sit there and write 144 tweets or whatever per day, right? Anonymity. If you look at the information of the account, sometimes they'll have like a generic profile picture, or maybe their bio is sort of like politics, rah, 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 stuff like that.
And they won't have any specific information to their location. or to anything that says, hey, I may be from Spain, or I'm from Iran or Portugal.
Or I'm a real person.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the content too, they'll have posts that are sort of just either all politics or all about that particular topic. If you kind of look at their profile back in time, or they're just retweeting quotes of, sort of the people in power, or or just one kind of sided messaging, which, obviously if I believe in one particular quote side of the story, unquote, I'll probably not retweet the other view. But at the same time, you could still tell that it's my account because I'm also putting up pictures of my cat, right? So those are some of like the kind of quick and easy, dirty ways of to telling whether something is real or not in terms of an account on social media. And there's also this whole thing where if there's more than one, like if someone is creating a fake bot, they'll probably be using the same type of information in all the fake bots. So if you're starting to see sort of similar, whether it's the content or the bio or the photos, that'll get you thinking, right? Like also how old is the account?
Yes,
that's a big. If you look at they've only been posting since this whole thing started. How interesting.
Well, and the other thing that I find interesting is that most of us come across these fake bots all the time, but it's not even for politics. It's actually for pornography.
Oh God, yes.
These porn sites, because there's affiliate marketers for porn sites. You may not have realized this, but it's just like how Amazon has Amazon Associates, which is their affiliate marketing program. The same thing with the porn industry with their websites. They have people who get paid based on the links that you click on. And there are a ton of these fake accounts on Twitter all the time. And you can easily tell they're not a real person, right? They're like, oh, message me on Kick or whatever random thing they use.
Singles are ready to meet you tonight.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, this is not a real person. So what I would say is if you get those and you're familiar with those, just then try to compare it to one of these political posts. If you find an account that's posting a bunch of political stuff, maybe it's just political porn.
Oh, political porn. There you go. That's what the trolls online do, right? They basically
do political porn.
Yeah, they go on these, Reddits and articles, and they comment on stuff, and they go on people's streams, and they're basically jacking themselves off to their own opinions.
It's true.
It's basically what's happening.
And RX Mongo says fake account equals no cat pictures confirmed. I mean, that's just like a 0.01% of it. But yeah, you could start there and work your way up.
You can put puppy pictures or bunnies or ferrets or snakes. I mean,
Yeah,
whatever animals suits your fancy.
Karen Source says also, I think with Catalonia, it's also very interesting because it's different culture and religion, if I recall. I don't know about the religion aspect, but yes, the culture's different and the language is different too. They do not speak Spanish there.
They speak Catalonian.
Catalonians. So yes, I mean they're already separated in a way by their language and by their culture and by how they've been treated in the past. And so yeah, you're seeing more upheaval there. We're going to see more upheaval in the Middle East as well.
Barcelona is also a pretty big international player. So if it were to break away from Spain, Spain would take a little bit of a hit economically, politically, internationally. Well, so they don't want to let go.
Well, and I think too that with that situation, social media was a huge help. People on YouTube sharing videos, people on Instagram sharing videos, and other social media platforms, they were taking videos of the police literally dragging Catalonians from the voting booths and like beating them just to get them out of there. They were kicking people in the head downstairs. They were throwing them across the floor, hitting them with batons just to get them to move. They were not allowing them to do their due diligence in voting. And if it wasn't for social media sharing this content out, we might not be as well informed. I still think we're still not that well informed on the whole situation.
Right.
But I think at least we wouldn't even know it existed if it wasn't for that. So social media can do a lot of good as well. Again, who's controlling the messaging and just looking into all sides of it as best as we can.